Hello, this is Emily Seal, back to talk about directing today. Directing is what I've been doing for the last 5 years or so, and I'm really enjoying it. I really am. It wasn't my first love. My first love was acting, but I think that once you've kind of been doing acting a while, directing is a good logical next step because you can take the knowledge that you've acquired and then pass it on to the next generation. So I think the best acting teachers are the best directors. I know my best acting teachers have been in process and directing. My best costuming teachers have been directors who are seasoned and can give me advice and steer me in a certain direction. Uh, Steer me in a direction, thus the director. Now, we're going to start by talking about film directors because directing is a very can be a very disconcerting concept because it's so tangential. It's not concrete. It's not. So let's look at some styles that may be very recognizable to you. Tim Burton, right? He's always worked with dark colors, a lot of more morbid themes. He loves to cast Johnny Depp. Steven Spielberg has a lot of action movies, usually involving, one or more special effect. My personal favorite is a new movie he did called Super 8, but Indiana Jones. Who's not going to love Indiana Jones? Scorsese, if you like that action and blood and guts and stuff. Nora Ephron, she did When Harry Met Sally. Now, she's a writer director. She also did Sleepless in Seattle, a lot of romance. Spike Lee is a cutting edge African American documentary person. He's also done more historical things. Joel and Ethan Cohen are some of my favorite humorists. They've done a variety of things, but Joel and Ethan Cohen have a really quirky sense of humor. Wes Anderson has very strong design concepts. If you look at, I can't think of a Wes Anderson movie, Life Aquatic. He casts the same people over and over again. We've got Bill Murray, and they all have a high music orientation and a really interesting design concept. Then we have somebody like Hitchcock who uses suspense, lots of weird angles, lots of shadows. So this is just kind of the way that we can start talking about directors. Who do they like to cast? Many of them, look at somebody like Woody Allen, they cast the same people over and over again. So they stick with what works. I don't blame them. But as we talk today about theater designers, directors, I'll come back to film directors often because I want you to kind of have that comparison for yourself. And some of you, I'm always amazed when I have this conversation in class how few people even know who their directors are. And then when we get back and start looking at their favorite movies, we go to IMDb and see, oh, he really, really liked Men in Tights, and he also really, really liked Young Frankenstein. Well, believe it or not, the writer director on both of that was Mel Brooks. So you didn't know it, but you're a Mel Brooks fan. So as you do the conversation starter this week on your discussion board, I want you to take special time to kind of sit down and really find out, and maybe your favorite director is just because of one movie, and that's your favorite movie. It only takes one good movie to make a good director, so let's give them that credit. And there's a little director chair. Um, my father played for Bear Bryant in the late 1960s. He was injured very quickly. Tim Brown was his name, but he just loved Bear Bryant. I mean, anybody who has um, been a fan of Alabama football for any extended period of time is probably in the same boat as my dad. But I bring up Bear Bryant because he's a very inspirational coach. And you can often think of a director as similar to the coach of a team, that he's a unifying factor after the, touchdown is scored and the quarterback does his little celebration dance. He'll often come back to that coach. Did I do good, coach? What do you think, coach? And I'm always amazed to watch the Olympics and see how an amazing athlete can turn around to a 70-year-old person and look to approval from them, their coach, to someone who could not even do what they had just done, but who is the mastermind behind all of it. And that's kind of the way that a coach and a director can be. My dad used to always quote different little wisdoms or sayings that a coach, that Bear would say to them, agile, mobile, and hostile. I don't know what he thought he was teaching a little, 8-year-old girl there about hostility, but the point is, the wisdom that a coach or a director can give you will live on with you after a play. But a coach is unseen for the most part until, the Super Bowl is won and the Gatorade's dumped over somebody's head. For the most part, you can watch football without knowing who the coach is. And the same is true of the event of theater. You can watch the play without knowing the director. All right, so let's look at the history of directing here. I'm not going to pretend to know how to pronounce that, but that's the ancient Greek word for teacher. A director started off as a teacher. In the medieval times, they were called master. But in ancient Greece, it was often the teacher was the same one as the playwright, the same person. We have record of Aeschylus and all of those great writers directing their own first works when they went into the games to be judged against each other. And they had a long rehearsal period. It was something like 6 months. We have this teacher kind of character. This was what the ancient directors were called. And this is, it's worth mentioning, what most of us who are director now, the first directors that most actors have are when they're in school. We're the teachers, we're the people teaching them how to be an actor, and so we go on and we're their director in these processes. So, all the way up through your master's level, your doctorate level work, your directors are often the teachers of the institution that are trying to make you a better theater artist. The head playwright or the lead actor would kind of take charge. We know that in Shakespeare's day he directed some of the works, but then we also know that the guy who was playing the lead, Hamlet particularly, we know that he turned around and kind of gave some direction to his cohorts, his fellow actors. And it's worth mentioning then too that the staging, the blocking where people were standing was much more simplistic. Hamlet was downstage center, to be or not to be, and all the rest of the people were standing in the background. It was not nearly as complicated. Even the stage combat, we have every reason to believe that it was a stab and grab, what we call them in the theater, a stab and grab. They would, it was not the ornate combat scenes that we have in modern plays. It was, I've been stabbed, fall over, very simplistic. So around the turn of the century, and we're on page 95, by the way, we kind of had this rise of wanting to make plays historically accurate. We were looking at this sort of dissection, realism, exploring the world around us, and turning to cold hard facts is kind of the philosophy of the day. And so as part of that, they wanted to create historically accurate plays. And that historical accuracy gave people jobs because it takes a lot more work to create a historically accurate version of Julius Caesar set in the Roman times than the way that Shakespeare staged it, right? In Shakespeare's day, they didn't wear togas. They probably wore their regular clothes. They didn't have, there were lots and lots of malapropisms, the historical inaccuracies, as it were. So when we decided to stage plays that were truly historically accurate, that required a lot more effort. And then the stylistic interpretation we'll get into in just a minute. So realism, I'll start using this word a lot, especially as we get into talking about modern theater. Realism is where we're trying to create a sense of daily life on stage. So we may ask, like I said, Stanislavski appreciated realism. The person to actually get out a cigarette and smoke it, to get in the bathtub and watch the steam roll off of the water. So that sort of attention to detail required a critical eye of a director to watch it happen. So we'll talk a minute about a reaction to realism, but first, realism was a reaction to melodrama. If you remember the styles lecture, the genre lecture, melodrama is where we have a really, really good guy and a bad guy, and usually a girl tied to a railroad track, and the really, really good guy says all really wise and thoughtful things, and it can be one dimensional in nature. And the sets were fake, very fake, and the music was over dramatic. And so realism was trying to get away from that fake sensibility and create something more believable, more like a reflection, more like what people were used to in daily life. So, our first director, if anybody ever walks up to you on the street and says, "Who was the first theater director?" Because I know that's happening to me all the time, say George II, Duke of Saxe-Meiningen. We don't have a whole lot of information about Duke here. He was in the 1870s and 1880s. He was wealthy. His kind of band of players were very lifelike. They had very fluid exits and entrances. There were less extras. It's worth mentioning what an extra is, actually. An extra is a person who gets paid to stand in the background. So if you're watching a TV show and they're at a party and there are 15 people dancing at the party, but they don't have any lines, those are extras. And so extras were sort of standard place in classical theater because they were often performing in the courts. They were telling these grand stories that involved lots and lots of people, and so they would have extras standing in the background to create that sense of royalty or occasion, or to fill in the dance sequence. And Duke of Saxe-Meiningen kind of got away from those extras and created an ensemble, which we know is popular during realistic theater as a genre. Everybody had a part to play, and they played that fluidly in a give and take with attention to detail and a sense of harmony, but it was historically correct, right, which was most important. So if we're looking at Joe Turner's Come and Gone, which is the play that you read recently, he August Wilson is definitely a realistic writer. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't include moments of expressionism or moments of absurdism, even. But for the most part, it is regular people in a regular room. You know, in this case, doing a dance and eating biscuits, right? Now, it takes a good director to create this chaos, believe it or not. It's much easier to create synchronized movement where everybody is zombie robots moving in sync. It is much harder to create organized chaos where you have to make it look easy and make it look natural. So, Joe Turner's Come and Gone is an excellent example of realistic theater and realistic theater done well. So, André Antoine is another naturalist who is interested in the expression of truth. I think it's worth mentioning some of these other names down here. David Bolesco in America, representing Otto Braun in Germany. So this was a trend, full out trend of attention to nuance, and patterns. Now, this is, I don't want to confuse you. Joe Turner's Come and Gone was written in the 80s. I mean, it's a modern play, but it is in the same genre or style as these realistic directors at the turn of the century were initially envisioning. So, just as the pendulum went away from melodrama into realism, we have stylization as a reaction to realism. One of my favorite directors of all time is Julie Taymor. If you haven't already watched the clip of Lion King the Musical, please go away now and do that. She is a wonderful visionary for Shakespeare and opera and musicals. She's recently done Spider-Man, the musical, on Broadway that involves acrobatics above the audience's head. They're flying around as Spider-Man, fighting the Green Goblin up above the audience's head. I mean, it's just so innovative. By the time you hear this lecture, I'm sure she will have come up with some other form of genius. But Lion King was really one of the most moving theatrical experiences of my life because it was so stylized. If you can see, the actors are wearing puppets on top of their head. They're wearing a second mask, and when they move, those puppets touch each other. They touch their face of the other puppeteer, and the way that they move like a lion is very impressive and takes a lot of physical stamina. It's a very stylized production, and her vision came through with the mask and costumes. Her vision came through with a lot of the choreography that she created herself. This is very much her baby and her vision, and she's in fact kind of criticized for being so involved and not letting other people sort of do it for her. She's so wants to have full control of the style of the play. But I think she does a great job of creating a world that's not realistic. Now, it's still believable. I really enjoy thinking about lions and, the king of the jungle and stuff. But it is anti-realistic. It is imaginative. It is compelling. So we're over to... There's my pendulum there, in case you don't know what a pendulum is. It swings from one side and swings to the other. And that is Titanic, the musical. I had to throw in these musical references where I can and promote it. So this is the captain of a ship, and there's a famous analogy that Gordon Craig laid out in 1905 in saying that the director's job was to lead theater into this revolution. And in this revolution, the renaissance of art would overtake the theater. We've got new acting and costuming and lighting and carpentry, complete control by the genius director. The independent and, genius director steering everybody in the same direction, which is a very poetic way of putting it, and I think in most cases a pretty accurate way of putting it. You have to be fearless, you have to be communicative and open, which I don't think that the captain of the Titanic was, or whoever was sitting behind that radio, or really messed up. So, I love the way that your textbooks describes the simultaneity of sensory expression. So the director has to make sure that we feel that light, and that light matches that set design, that sun coming down, and that sun reflects well onto the puppets and those amazing skills of those actors who can walk on stilts there. So there's so many skilled people coming together to create this one piece of art. The man who crafted that beautiful soft linen sun and took this time to sew every little piece together so that it has that nuance on across the sun that looks like the rising dust of the Sahara. And then we've got the beautiful actors and their ability to walk on those stilts, and the costume designer who created those stilts, and the props designer who created that puppet for the actor to use, and then the lighting designer's ability to create that color that's just so striking. So we'll talk more about this next class when we discuss design, but really it's such a sensory expression. It's all of it coming together, and it has to happen under the director's clear leadership, or else it's messy and it doesn't come together. It needs to all fit together like a puzzle. It needs to all blend and look like it came out of one person's genius brain and look easier than it is, right? The mark of good art is that it often looks easier than it is. Many people compare it to a palette, right? It's got to have colors that flow. It's got to have a sense of continuity. It's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. So I said page 101 here, but we're really starting all the way back on 97. It's a little bit confusing. There's that 2-page photo essay in the middle, but Directors do not work in a vacuum. Directors have to answer to producers. This is another musical. I'm just pitching musicals left and right. Called The Producers by Mel Brooks. It's one of my favorite musicals. They're starring Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick and Uma Thurman. If you haven't seen the movie, go rent it right now. Go watch it. It's hilarious. But the producers in this are modeled after a very corrupt producer who's trying to raise money and then create a flop play so that they can keep all the money that they raised. But the producer in most cases is equal to dollar signs. When you think of producer, it's wise to consider them as the money guru, the person who's good with money, the person who keeps the budget and makes sure that everybody else is staying on budget. So if you don't have a building you stay in, the producer's job is to acquire a facility. And this is for many, many theaters. They don't have a home base. They have to move around and acquire the facility when they change as well. If they move up from off Broadway to Broadway, back to Boston, whatever stage in the process that it's going, the producer tries to hunt down the best option. In some cases, the producer is in charge of selecting the play. If you go in to pitch a movie or play idea to a producer, usually, rather than a director, because the producer's got to believe in your idea enough to fork over the money or find somebody who will fork over the money. Usually they're more of the businessman. Now, in many cases, the director and the producer are the same person. You look at somebody like Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson is starring in the production. He is the producer and he's the director. For all I know, he goes back into the editing room too. I mean, some people just do it all, but the producer in my case is Debbie Zimmerman. She's the chair of our department, so she decides to some extent how much money I can spend and what kind of play we need to do. So maybe last year we did a musical, so this year we need to do a classical piece, or these kids seem to have an affluency for language, so let's do a Shakespeare. So she kind of helps steer us in the right direction as the chair of the department. Sorry, back to your book here. So I think it's interesting that he does say he who pays the piper calls the tune. Very, very true. In some cases, the director is picked because they already like the play or they have a certain affinity for that kind of writing. But usually the producer has the ultimate call because they're the one with the money. In some cases, the producer will cast the play and hire the crew, and the director is hired with everybody else. In some cases, you have a casting director, someone who's entirely separate in charge of casting. It is a sticky and long process, and we'll get around to that in just a second. Okay, so this is Carrie's War. This is a recent production at Motley Campus Main Stage. And I'm going to kind of use pictures from this because I like them. And I'll kind of give examples from our experience in the process at Motley College. So what is the director's function? Number one, if it's either the director or the producer, somebody has got to choose the play. Choose the play. This is not easy. And it can get a director's hopes up. There are many, many plays I've got to direct before I die. Peter Pan is right on up there. Fences was a dream of mine for several years before I got to direct that. Every director kind of gets these visions in their head or these yearnings or an itch they've got to scratch, and so they kind of look for a play that indulges that side of themselves. That's our director there, Jeanne Brandt. She's the one standing in the green skirt backstage, getting ready to go out and give her opening curtain speech. Turn off your cell phones, that kind of business. And that's Carrie sitting in our chair right there from Carrie's War. So first of all, you have to pick something you like. Jeanne Brown chose this play because she was going to London every summer with a study abroad program, and she was really into London. She's turned into somewhat of an Anglophile. She loves World War II history, and so then this play is set in World War II. It's about all the children who had to evacuate from the city in order to avoid being bombed. And so it got to kind of express that love she has for England. But then it also has to be somewhat within the audience interests. A big part of our audience for the Motlow main campus was inviting the elementary school children. So by choosing a play that has elementary school children in it, it sort of meets that audience interest and piques their interest. If we had done a play like Shakespeare, the kids would not have gotten it. They wouldn't have followed it. They probably wouldn't have liked it. So, a down to earth story about other kids is probably much more up their alley. Producibility. Producibility. So, there's a couple questions that go along with producibility. Do we have a Carrie? When you do a show that has the name of the character in the title. Luckily, we had Olivia here. She was a fantastic Carrie, and she could memorize all the lines. But if you don't have a Hamlet, you don't announce the Hamlet season. If you don't have an old guy to play King Lear, you don't do King Lear. You got to make sure that you have the talent. Don't do Chicago if you don't have a good dancer. You got to kind of cast to what you know you have. And this isn't a problem for everyone, obviously, but when you're doing local or community theater or educational theater, you definitely want to pick for the talent that you have and pick things that cater to them, that they can be brilliant in. And the best directors know how to pick plays for their favorite actors. Hey, there's me. I was in it. I was the old lady. And I was also the costumer. And so that big, beautiful dress you saw there was rented because I was trying to stay in budget. Most of the costumes were pretty modest, but the set was pretty big. So we need to make sure that we had, at that moment, we did have a carpenter working in the class. He was actually taking the class, which was huge luck on our part. So that cut down on a bunch of our budgeting. Do you have the money to stage the play? I'll never forget when I went to go see Miss Saigon at TPAC and the helicopter didn't come down. And I was so mad. That's the one thing about Miss Saigon is that the helicopter is supposed to land on stage. And they had used a projection, obviously to save money on it, but they didn't tell us that they were going to do that when they sold us the ticket. So it can seem pretty unfair. And I was listening to an interview recently about Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, the Broadway Spider-Man by Julie Taymor, and she was saying how it's sort of unfair that a show like hers costs so much to put money into, and it costs the same to the Broadway patron as it does for them to see, last 5 years, which is two people alone standing on stage singing. So it's hard to stay on budget, and you've got to be practical with what amount of money you have. One of the best ways to get fired in the theater industry is to overspend your budget. And Julie Taymor did get fired. Like I said, she's one of my favorite directors, but she spent too much on Spider-Man the musical and got fired. And she's in a very long legal battle right now because she claims that a lot of those original ideas should be copyrighted and she should be compensated for them. She didn't feel like she was compensated fairly because the director is the one with the vision, and that vision, she believes, is copyrighted. So I'll be interested to see how this affects the theater world in general, and I'll be interested to see if Julie Taymor gets her money. Concept. This is another picture from Carrie's War. This is a child young enough to have a doll in her hand, right? And how does that make us feel thinking about children in wartime? That can really sort of jar our beliefs and challenge our presuppositions about living in a good world, living in a just world, when we know that children are dying every day in unfair wars that they don't have anything to do with. And so this is really kind of a tough play to ask an audience to kind of go there emotionally and imagine that with you, especially for young children. Imagine wartime. It's kind of a pretty high cost, but your audience respects that, and your audience, in most cases, will go with you and will learn something in the process. A lot of us sit around and talk about war in concept, but how many times do we actually take the time to really think about it through the eyes of a child? So these are this is a theater in Murfreesboro called Outfront on Main, and it's a edgy theater. It does a lot of new plays, so the fact that this is a new play by an American playwright is not unusual for Outfront on Main. And Outfront on Main also does quite a few plays with homosexual themes. It's the artistic director is homosexual, and it's kind of a place for many homosexuals to come together and celebrate art. So what is risky for them, or what challenges other people's presuppositions, may just be they go there to sort of reinforce what they already believe, to sort of come together and rally around and find a safe place, because many homosexuals can't talk about this stuff with their, family at Thanksgiving, but they can sit around and talk to other homosexuals about it in the theater, and that's a safe place for them. It's a small theater. It's only 75 seats, 100 seats, but it does really important work, and it does challenge us intellectually and focus us. So if you've never gotten a chance to come over to Outfront on Main, I recommend it. I haven't seen a bad play there yet. On the other hand, another really successful playhouse I enjoy is Cumberland County Playhouse in Crossville, Tennessee. You can see there they have the Music Man with a child right there on the front. You can imagine it is a G-rated show. Kids are invited. But I recently saw a play here that was about an Episcopalian priest who lost his faith, and that I was sitting in the audience with a lot of gray hairs, a lot of older ladies and gentlemen, and for them that was a challenging play to talk about somebody who had lost their faith in God. It was still not nearly as challenging as something we would see, at Outfront on Main. It's not gonna a bunch of gray hair sitting around talking about homosexuality, but for the Cumberland County Playhouse, that was kind of an edgy show. And so, for your audience, what do they want to talk about? What do they want to reaffirm ideologically that they believe in? What do they want to challenge on their presuppositions? Music Man, it was risque in its day, to each his own. And now it's more of a celebration of good old-fashioned values and a more of a celebration of wonderful music style that is long gone, but it still has its place. For each good director, they find their audience, they play to their audience, they know how to challenge their audience and what their audience needs. Organizing principles. So we're going to kind of get super conceptual here for a minute, and I don't want you to get too confused. So going back to Carrie's War. This is Carrie sitting there holding her brother's chin, and she's kind of trying to comfort him and tell him that it's going to be all right, even though they're shipped off to Wales, and even though this is a scary time. So let's just sort of put this on the play, even though we finished it. But the concept might be the process of wartime. What's it like for these young family to sort of go through the process of waiting out the war and then being able to come back? And then, how comfortable were they with evacuation, and how comfortable were they with coming back into the city, or going to Scotland, as they actually end up going? So the principle that we're looking at, right, is how can we condense this down? What's the simplest way of saying it? Albert Einstein very famously said, if you can't say it simply, you don't understand it fully, right? And so the best concepts are ones that have been condensed and been, we really got down to the heart of it, and then we bring out that heartbeat in the rest of the play. So another way to kind of simplify your concept is to look at what do you want on the poster, right? Children in wartime. It's a nice, simple tagline and a way for me to pitch it to the audience, future audience, on a poster that may pull them in. It may pull in children. It may pull in people who are historically interested, right? It may pull in people who want to hear a story about war, maybe people who've been in a war. So how can you sort of condense your information to make it digestible for your audience and give them a vision? And one that I accidentally left off here that I want to go back to is high concept. This is setting a play in a new I'll go ahead and go to this one so it's not too confusing. Setting a play in a new setting. Okay, let's try this again. So if I'm doing a Shakespeare play like Romeo and Juliet, and I set it in a time that there are guns, right, and I put everybody in jeans and Bahama shirts, then I have updated it. And your book calls that a high concept, setting a play in a new era. Now, you only want to do this in old plays. You do not want to take modern day plays and set them in new eras because that is an unnecessary update, right? The reason we set Romeo and Juliet in a new era is to tell a new side of the story. We don't need that novelty if we're doing a new play. And it's interesting to think about this as a unique vision to a classic story. And this is what you'll be doing for your assignment this week. So we'll talk a little bit more about high concept then. But just, I wanted to bring your attention to Tim Burton and the way that he retold that Willy Wonka, or the way that he retold Alice in Wonderland, right, through his unique lens. So as a visionary, you can create a new story from an old one, which is pretty cool to think about. So I'm going to go over three types of casting. Typecasting. This is actually not in your book, but I did want to talk about it. Typecasting often happens when you cast someone specifically for their personality, the way they look, into a play where they're playing themselves. So a good example of typecasting is Meg Ryan, right? She doesn't play a whole lot of outlandish characters. If you look at her in When Harry Met Sally, if you look at her in Sleepless in Seattle, if you look in her at French Kiss, I mean, these are very similar characters. She's playing herself, and she's playing herself well. And so, we're not complaining about being typecast, but you'll often hear jokes about this. A big dumb football player character, and they're like, oh, well, he's typecast, and which isn't always the case. But to say that you're typecasting someone means you're taking them and their own personality and their own predispositions and just sticking them in the play to play themselves. Non-traditional casting usually has in relation to gender, right? So if I cast a woman to play a man's part, speaking of Julie Taymor, she cast Helen Mirren in Tempest to play the main character, which is traditionally a man, but she cast it as a woman. Colorblind casting. This can be confusing, right, for some audiences, but it's important. It's kind of the equivalent of equal opportunity. Because what would happen is we have one person of color in a predominantly white casting pool, and so then they get left out of these family dramas. So if I'm doing All My Sons and I have a white mom, a white dad, but I have a really good young African American boy audition, I can, under the colorblind casting concept, cast that son to be black, even though he has a white mother and father. And what that does, colorblind casting, is it allows us to ignore color. This is, we're not talking about August Wilson. We're talking about in a colorblind, creating colorblind atmosphere. So a play that doesn't necessarily have strong cultural ties. I see this a lot with Christmas Carol. In that day and time, you probably wouldn't have had a lot of people walking around in turn of the century England. People of color probably would not have been there, but we want to give those people opportunities to be cast, so we cast people of color in those roles. Ignoring the racial differences is basically the heart of the issue. This is not done in film often, but it is done in theater to give equal opportunity to people of color. Collective hope. No pressure. And what we talk about collective hope, there's sort of this moment in a play where everyone starts to feel the sense of risk. It's before opening night. Things aren't getting done. So this is a picture in process. You can see the metal chairs there. You can see people not in costume. And this is often the state of things in theater. It all kind of comes together at the last minute, and we feel a sigh of relief on opening night that it all came together. But as the costumer, I have to ask the director, do you think that this is working? Do you think that that dress looks look pretty? Is that jacket too big on him? And the director has to constantly reaffirm my hope. It looks great. If you nip and tuck here, and the concept is going to go strong. Carrie might come to our director, Jeanne Brandt, and might say, "Oh no, what am I going to do? I can't remember that line." And the director's got to be the patient and calm and person who keeps it together and says, "Oh, you've got this. You can do this." And this is really one of the most exhausting parts of a directorial job, being the one who's confident, being the one who believes in the production enough to see it to an end. And once again, speaks to the spirituality of theater, that we need a leader and someone who we can hope in and trust in, and someone who can keep the positivity flowing, I guess you should say. I guess we're going back to the theater shaman here, but and it's not unusual to have a moment of silence before a play, or recite the Psalm 23. Not that we're all ready to die, but there is a spirituality to believing and waiting and hoping for a play to open, and that the director has to sort of be the confident rock that we carry there. So when we're talking about staging, we've moved on to talking about staging. One of the most difficult parts is the dancing and the dueling. So often we'll hire a fight instructor. This is a fight sequence. You can see he's got that rake held up. He was about to stab the guy on the ground with it. And that may look pretty incidental there, but it's actually pretty choreographed. You can see the guy behind him grabbing the rake from him, and our small boy grabbing him around the waist to physically restrain him from hurting the other guy. And so these fight scenes are done by a fight director. If you're interested in being a fight director, we can talk about that. Email me and we'll continue that conversation. I'm certified in broadsword and quarterstaff and arm-to-arm combat. You could probably beat me up, but I can pretend to fight you better than you can pretend to fight me. Dancing is another big deal, especially when we're doing classical pieces where there are historical dances or musical theater. We talked a little bit about triple threats, but we'll talk about this even more next week when we talk about design. But those moments that you see, don't automatically give the director credit, because that may have been a professional who stepped in to either choreograph that movement or that fight. So, stage business. So you can see here that she's drinking her tea, and that the aunt in the background is pouring up tea. It's not unusual in a play to have stage business, something going on, whether they're folding a sheet or accomplishing something physically on stage while the real action of the play is an undercurrent. Because many times in our lives, we're having conversations with someone while we're driving somewhere, or while we're on our way. Hopefully not texting and driving, but on the way, as we go, we talk to people. It's not necessarily that we stop everything we're doing and have these conversations. So stage business is an important part of any director's blocking. Drumming on the tablecloth. Especially if you're creating a realistic play, people don't usually stop, look each other in the eye, and have a conversation. There's usually stage business going on. So let's talk a little bit more in depth about staging. I think this is really on page 127 still. I don't know why I put 129. So the stage picture, this is a supplement to your text. It's the arrangement of actors on stage. So if I were to take a picture of this moment, which I did, you can see that this older man is yelling at this younger boy. So it tells you a story. How does Carrie feel about this moment? Well, we can see it written all over her face. She doesn't like it at all. How does the aunt feel about it? She has her back to the conflict. She's not intervening. She's not turning around. She's not even facing the situation. She's turning away from it. So we've told a story just with the way we've arranged these actors on stage. And your director did that. She created that stage picture that animates and communicates. Focus. Where is the audience eye? So if you were to pick a character in this scene, I would pick the guy in white. Now, part of that is just that he is wearing a white shirt, and white draws the attention. If we want to draw attention on our wedding day, wear a white dress. Congratulations, you are the center of attention. We'll talk more about focus next class when we talk about tech. Spatial composition. How close or far apart are you? And this is one of my least favorite things about film, is how close you have to be to each other, as I said before. But we call it fight or flight. Are we nose to nose with somebody? Usually means we're about to kiss them or we're about to hit them if we're really close in proximity to a person. But that's something that new actors really have a hard time with, is proximity. It can be awkward to walk up to a complete stranger and pretend that you're in love with them and kiss them on the mouth, or if you are playing their mother, to walk up to them and stroke their hair like they're your daughter. I mean, that can be kind of awkward. So you just have to remember when you're playing a character that they relate to each other differently than someone who is not physically related or sexually attracted to each other. Okay, and the biggest deal is pacing. Pacing, 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 pacing. And there's a lot of talk about this on page 129, which is, I guess, why I put 129 at the top of the page. But you don't want to have just pregnant pauses in your play too often unless you're doing Pinter. You need to keep the pace going. Louder, faster, funnier is the refrain of many comedic directors. A well-paced play, nothing it drags. It's not too slow. And I will tell you right now, the default of most performers is too slow, because we're trying to play the moment. We're trying to be emphatic, and the director's responsibility is to keep the story moving so the audience doesn't get bored. Or in some cases, the actors could be nervous and be rushing, and the director needs to slow us down a little bit. In most cases, their job is to speed us up. That's Jeanne Tucker Brown there in the blue shirt with the white pants. You can't really see her. She's standing in the darkness, as directors often are, but she's doing what's called side coaching. She has come up and she is asking, the actor to feel a certain emotion. She's paused the run through of the play to give the actor some advice. Now, you don't want to do this too much in process because you want the actors to be able to practice, but if you never stop them, they never know what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong. So it can be a pretty important thing to stop actors and give them advice and let them continue their run. Actor coaching, you have to have a good way of talking to actors. You can't just say, "Hey, you're an idiot, stop doing it that way." Although sometimes you feel that way. Other times they need a little bit of discipline or shaking up. Sometimes the actor isn't taking it seriously enough. So it can be an intuition game between a director and an actor. You have to learn how to talk to your actors. You have to give them the respect. But then you also have to get things accomplished, which sometimes involves some uncomfortable conversations. And that is the sticky, sticky business of being in the theater. So, this was early on in the rehearsal process. You can see they're wearing t-shirts. You can tell that the part played by a boy is actually a girl there. You can see that the furniture is all just hodgepodged together. And I want to show this shot to kind of show you how far these things come in a matter of weeks. This was only weeks before we opened the show, and we've got rugs and rehearsal tape down, and it feels like a mess. And the director's job is to pull everybody together and get them all on the same stage, and get them all on the same page, and have those technical rehearsals where we say lights up, lights down, and encourage actors to imagine that they've got those lights up and lights down. And it can be a managerial nightmare. If you've ever had to sit down for your work and schedule out who works when, it can be a very complicated process. Now imagine that when you've got 50 people working on a play, getting everybody at one place at one time it can be a nightmare. So just managing and keeping everybody together and working towards the same end and coordinating it can be very strenuous. And if you're not the kind of person who has an eye for detail, that can be one of the hardest aspects of the job, is making sure that every little I gets dotted and every little T gets crossed, because you have to coordinate those things, because as sure as you don't, it becomes what the play was about. Did you see that she didn't have shoes on? Right? Why didn't she have shoes on? Well, they had everything else fixed, but her shoes broke the night before, and so now she has to go on without shoes on. That upstaged the entire production. Every little bit has to be in place. If you've got a good director, then they've coordinated it all and they have backup shoes. They're waiting in the wings. Yeah, this is me being a little bit harsh, but it's true. You don't see the director there at the Little Mermaid bowing with the actors. You just see the actors. And this is Little Mermaid, by the way. Yes, it is the stage version of the musical you know and love. And it's true on 132, his rant here about consigned to anonymity. And it can be true. I mean, now some directors enjoy great fame, like we said earlier, Tim Burton, Nora Ephron, but most directors are the wind beneath your wings, to quote Bette Midler, or whoever actually wrote that song. The directors, the people who work really, really hard and then often stand in the shadows. They don't have all of the fame and all the glory. So it can be a thankless job. If you're a person interested in getting patted on the back and reassured and coddled, directing is not for you, because it can be a very thankless job. All right, so that concludes our talk on directing. Next class, we will get into talking about tech and dress and lights and costumes and all that fun stuff. But for now, I'd like you to go away and read Little Red Riding Hood and fill out that worksheet. Create a concept that's all your own. And also get on that conversation board and start talking about your favorite directors and what styles you enjoy in movies, as that's really our accessible talking point here. And congratulations, you're halfway through the course. Director is right at lecture number 5, so if you've gotten this far, you can do it. Hold out with me until the end. Thank you for listening.